The stars twinkled outside the massive windows of the Odyssey spaceship as it drifted through the vast emptiness of space. The crew of this exploration ship had been traveling for months, on a mission to chart new planets and expand humanity's understanding of the universe. They had encountered many strange and fascinating things on their journey, but today was different. Today, they were about to meet an alien like no other. Zira, the newest member of the crew, was a member of the Kylara, a species that humans had only recently encountered. The Kylara were known for their intelligence, elegance, and their strikingly different physical forms. Zira had joined the crew only a few weeks ago, sent by her people to help humans with their mission. Her knowledge of space technology was unparalleled, and her species had developed methods of space travel and maintenance far beyond anything humanity could imagine. Today, Zira was tasked with repairing the ship's outer hull. The Odyssey had been hit by a small asteroid earlier, and a crack had formed in the outer layer. It wasn't a huge issue, but it had to be fixed quickly to avoid any possible risk. Zira was the perfect person for the job, and she had already proven herself to be an invaluable asset to the crew. But there was something about this repair that no one had expected. The humans aboard the ship, despite their great strides in space, exploration, were still very much creatures of habit. They had their own customs, their own beliefs, and their own way of doing things. The concept of an alien, especially one as beautiful and mysterious as Zira, doing something so unconventional was something none of them had ever experienced. Zira stood in front of the airlock, her eyes focused on the ship's exterior. The high maintenance suit she wore was sleek and designed for maximum mobility, but it was still restrictive. She knew she needed more freedom to do the repair efficiently. Without a second thought, she began removing her suit, piece by piece. It was nothing personal. Zira's species had no issues with nudity. For the Kylara, it was a symbol of freedom and strength, not a matter of modesty. She had always felt more comfortable working without clothes, especially in the harsh environment of space. Her skin, soft and smooth, gleamed in the artificial light of the airlock. Her physique, built for both grace and strength, was unlike anything the humans had ever seen. As she removed the last piece of her suit, Zira stepped into the outer airlock. She didn't notice, or perhaps didn't care, that the humans aboard the ship were watching her from the observation deck. Commander Harris, the leader of the crew, stood with a mixture of confusion and fascination on his face. He had never expected something like this. The sight of Zira standing bare in the airlock was something completely outside the realm of his experience. "Is this normal?" Harris whispered to Lieutenant Jenna, who stood next to him. Jenna, younger and more open-minded, simply nodded. "It's how they do things. It's nothing personal," she said softly, but even she couldn't ignore the tension in the air. The other crew members, equally surprised, tried to focus on their work, but the sight of the alien woman outside, moving with ease as she made her way to the damaged area of the ship's hull, was hard to ignore. Harris tried to remind himself that Zira wasn't human. She didn't think like they did. She wasn't bound by the same societal rules and expectations that humans followed. Zira floated outside the ship, her body moving effortlessly as she maneuvered to the crack in the hull. With her alien technology, she didn't need to use tools in the traditional sense. Her species had evolved in such a way that their physical forms could manipulate materials in ways humans could not even imagine. The crack in the hull was nothing serious, but it had to be fixed immediately. Zira's long, delicate fingers moved, with precision as she worked, her body shifting and bending in ways that were completely natural for her. She wasn't concerned with the humans watching her, nor did she care about their reactions. She was focused on the task at hand. Meanwhile, on the observation deck, Harris couldn't take his eyes off her. He knew it was wrong. He was supposed to be the leader of this mission, the one in control. But something about Zira's calmness, her confidence, made him feel both uncomfortable and intrigued at the same time. "Should we say something?" To her? Harris asked, his voice low. He was still unsure of how to handle this situation. No, Jenna replied firmly. She's doing her job, and she's doing it better than anyone else could. Harris couldn't argue with that. Zira was amazing at what she did. Her ability to repair the ship, to move so effortlessly in space, was something beyond anything the humans had ever seen. It was as though she had become one with the environment, a part of the very fabric of the universe. As the minutes passed, the crew continued to watch. Zira worked methodically, each movement deliberate and precise. There was no hurry, no stress. She was in complete control of the situation, and yet the humans couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. It wasn't about the repair, it was about Zira herself. When Zira finally completed the repair, she returned to the airlock. She didn't rush or act differently than she had before. She simply floated back to the ship, her body moving gracefully, as though she had done this 1,000 times before. As she entered the airlock, she began to suit up again, as though the moment of her being without clothes had never happened. Harris stood still, staring at the spot where she had been. He didn't know what to make of it. He had always thought of himself as someone open-minded, someone who could handle anything that came his way. But this was different. This was challenging everything he had ever known about what was acceptable in space. I don't know what to think, Harris admitted, more to himself than to Jenna. I mean, she's incredible, but this is so unexpected. Jenna gave him a sympathetic look. I get it. It's a cultural thing. We don't have the same understanding of what's normal, but we're going to have to get used to it. Zira is part of the crew now, and we need to learn from each other. As Zira finished putting her suit back on, she turned to face the crew. Her eyes met Harris's for a brief moment, and there was something in her gaze that suggested she knew exactly what he was thinking. It wasn't judgment or superiority, it was simply understanding. She knew that the humans would need time to adjust to her ways, just as she was adjusting to theirs. "We've finished the repair," Zira said, her voice calm and confident. "The ship is stable again. We can proceed with the mission." Harris nodded, his mind still racing with 1,000 questions. But for now, he simply replied, "Good work, Zira. Thank you." Zira smiled softly. "You are welcome, Commander Harris. I look forward to the next phase of our journey." As she walked away, Harris couldn't help but wonder what other surprises this mission would bring. He had thought he understood space and its wonders, but the reality was that this journey was about more than just discovering new worlds. It was about learning to understand the unknown, both in the vastness of space and in the beings they encountered along the way. After the repair, things aboard the Odyssey settled into a strange sort of normality. The crew went back to their daily routines, and Zira, the alien from the Kylara species, continued her work. Yet the tension from the earlier events still hung in the air, like a cloud that refused to dissipate. Commander Harris tried to push the thoughts from his mind. The repair had been completed, the ship was safe, and there was no reason to dwell on something that was, in his mind, not ideal, but still necessary. Still, he couldn't shake the image of Zira standing outside, her bare form floating effortlessly in the cold, dark void of space. The ease with which she had performed the repair, her focus and grace, it all seemed like something from a different world, far beyond human understanding. The fact that she was completely at ease in that state only made it harder for Harris to forget. As days passed, the crew went about their business, but the sight of Zira had left a mark. Lieutenant Jenna, one of the younger members of the crew, was the first to approach Zira with a sense of curiosity. Jenna had always been someone open to new ideas, someone who thrived on learning and discovering. And now, she had a unique opportunity to understand an alien, someone whose culture and way of life were completely different from anything she had ever known. One evening, after the work shift had ended, Jenna found herself standing near the galley. Zira was sitting alone, her posture relaxed, her eyes gazing out at the stars through the windows. It wasn't often that Zira sought company, but Jenna had learned that she was always willing to share a moment of conversation when approached. With a nervous but determined step, Jenna walked over. "Zira?" Jenna began, trying to keep her voice calm. Zira turned to her with a soft smile. "Lieutenant Jenna, good evening." "I wanted to ask you something," Jenna said, unsure of how to word it, "about what happened when you were repairing the ship. I mean, why did you take off your clothes?" Zira didn't seem surprised by the question. She regarded Jenna for a moment before answering. "You are curious," she said. "I understand. It is not a simple matter to explain, not in a way that fits easily into the human mind." Jenna shifted uncomfortably, not wanting to make Zira feel as though she was being judged. I don't understand. For us, it's strange. I mean, humans are taught from childhood that certain things are private, especially in front of others. We wear clothes to cover ourselves, to protect our dignity." Zira nodded slowly, her gaze thoughtful. "I see. Your culture values modesty and privacy. For us, it is different. We do not hide our bodies because we see them as something to be proud of, something to work with, something that helps us achieve our goals." "Does it feel freeing?" Jenna asked, still unsure of the answer she would get. "In a way," Zira answered. "The Kailara believe in the power of being in tune with our bodies. We do not feel the need to conceal ourselves because we have nothing to hide. My species believes that removing our clothes when we work allows us to feel connected to the task at hand, to be more efficient, more focused. It is not about showing off or seeking attention. It is about being comfortable." Jenna thought about this for a moment. It made sense in a way. "So, for you, it's just practical?" "Yes," Zira said. "In space, we must be agile and adaptable. Clothing can be a hindrance, especially when working in conditions like these. For me, it is simply easier to repair the ship with no clothing to restrict my movements. It is not about comfort in the sense that humans know it, but about freeing myself to do what I need to do." Jenna's mind raced as she tried to process this. "That's so different from how we think. It's kind of beautiful, actually. The way you see your body. You don't see it as something to hide, but something to appreciate, to use." Zira's smile grew slightly. "Yes, my people see the body as a tool. We work with it, not against it, and we never look at others with judgment. We accept each person for who they are, without concern for what they wear or how they present themselves." Jenna felt a sense of awe as she listened. The simplicity and purity of the Kailara's view on the body was something that felt both alien and enlightening. It was almost as though Zira had stripped away the societal layers that humans had built around themselves, revealing a more honest, open approach to life. "I think I understand," Jenna said quietly. "But I'm still not sure how I feel about seeing it firsthand. You know, being around it." Zira regarded her with a look of understanding. "I know. It is not something that can be changed overnight. You must take your time. But I promise you, I do not do this to discomfort you. It is simply how I exist." There was a long silence as Jenna took in Zira's words. She had come here expecting to be uncomfortable, expecting to get some sort of explanation that would help her understand why Zira had acted the way she did. But what she received was something far deeper, an invitation to view the world, and even the human body, in a completely different way. "Thanks," Jenna said finally, her voice soft, "for explaining. It's just going to take time, you know. to adjust to all this. I understand, Zira replied, her voice calm and reassuring. It is not easy to shift perspectives, especially when the way you've been taught is so deeply ingrained. As Jenna walked away, she felt a sense of peace that hadn't been there before. She didn't fully understand Zira's culture, but she respected it. And maybe, just maybe, that respect would help bridge the gap between their worlds. Back on the bridge, Commander Harris was deep in thought, staring out at the stars. His mind kept returning to the repair, to the moment when he had watched Zira work. The image of her standing outside, completely unfazed by the cold, harsh vacuum of space, was still fresh in his mind. But now, after his conversation with Lieutenant Jenna, he began to see things in a different light. Maybe it wasn't about what Zira had done. It was about how his own mind had reacted to it. Harris had always prided himself on being open-minded, but this was testing his limits. He wasn't sure how to navigate the situation. He had spent his entire life with certain boundaries, certain expectations about what was normal. And here he was, faced with an alien who lived by completely different rules. It was challenging everything he had ever known. But Harris was a leader, and leaders had to adapt. They had to learn to think differently, to see beyond their own biases. He knew that he couldn't continue to focus on his discomfort. He needed to look at the bigger picture. The mission wasn't just about exploring new planets. It was about understanding the unknown, about building relationships with alien species and breaking down the walls that divided them. Zira was part of that mission. She wasn't just a tool for the crew's success. She was an ambassador, a representative of her species, and perhaps the key to a future where humans and aliens could coexist peacefully. And maybe, just maybe, she could teach him something about how to see the universe in a new way. The Odyssey had been drifting through the void of space for several weeks now. The crew was beginning to get used to the idea of having an alien among them, though there were still moments of awkwardness. Commander Harris had done his best to focus on the mission, but his mind kept returning to the strange encounter with Zira. The Kailara woman, whose species was so different from humanity, seemed to be constantly challenging his perception of the universe. Zira had been invaluable in repairing the ship, but her way of working and living was completely foreign to the humans aboard the ship. Harris had tried to put it out of his mind, focusing instead on the practicalities of their journey. However, one evening, after a long day of routine space exploration, Zira invited Harris to her quarters to discuss something that had been on her mind. Harris was intrigued. He had spent so much time focusing on the technical aspects of the mission that he had never taken the time to truly understand the Kailara culture, to learn more about the species that had now become an essential part of their crew. He knew that Zira had shared some of her people's customs, but he had yet to truly dive into the deeper aspects of their culture and technology. He accepted her invitation, and as he made his way to her quarters, his mind raced with questions. What would she reveal to him? What did he not know about the Kailara that he should understand? When Harris arrived, Zira greeted him with her usual calm and welcoming demeanor. She motioned for him to sit as she activated a holographic display, showcasing a series of images and diagrams. "I wanted to show you something," Zira said, her voice steady. "Something that will help you understand my people and the technology we use." Harris sat down, his curiosity piqued. He had no idea what to expect, but he was eager to learn more about the Kailara and their advanced technology. Zira began explaining the first image that appeared before them. It was a depiction of a Kailara bioengineering process, a technique that allowed her species to manipulate and enhance biological systems. Harris watched in awe as Zira explained how her people had developed the ability to seamlessly integrate biology with technology. It was a blend of the natural and the artificial, something that humanity had only dreamed of achieving. We do not see technology as something separate from ourselves. Zira said. "It is a part of who we are. Our biology and our technology are deeply intertwined. We have evolved to work with the systems of the universe, not to dominate them. Our bodies are capable of adapting to many conditions, and our technology allows us to enhance these natural abilities." Harris was fascinated. The idea of merging biology with technology was something completely outside his own experience. He had seen the advancements that humanity had made, but nothing like this. He was beginning to see why Zira had been so effective in her work on the ship. "Your body. It's not like anything we've ever seen," Harris said, still trying to grasp the magnitude of what he was being shown. "You're able to interact with the environment in ways that we can't even begin to understand." Zira nodded. "Our species has evolved in a way that allows us to manipulate our environment using both our physical form and our technology. This is why I was able to repair the hull of your ship without the need for conventional tools. My body can interact with the ship's materials in ways that your tools cannot." Harris watched as the next image appeared. It was a detailed illustration of the Kailara's biomechanical enhancements, showing how they could repair damage to their bodies by using their own biological systems. The Kailara had developed the ability to regenerate damaged cells and tissues, a process that allowed them to recover from injuries much more quickly than humans. It was like they had become a living example of what humanity could one day achieve. "It's amazing," Harris said, his voice filled with awe. "You can repair yourselves using your own biology." "Yes," Zira said, her expression thoughtful. "This is a gift from our evolution. We can use our own bodies to heal, to adapt, and to interact with the world around us. It is why our species is so in tune with the universe. We are not separate from it, we are part of it." Harris leaned forward, his curiosity growing. "And this technology, this ability to manipulate your biology, how does it work? How did your species develop it?" Zira smiled, clearly pleased with his interest. "It was a long process. Our people have always been in harmony with nature, and over time, we learned to integrate our biology with our environment. We began experimenting with genetic engineering, manipulating our own DNA to enhance our abilities. It wasn't easy, and it took many generations to perfect. But eventually, we learned to combine our biological systems with advanced technology, allowing us to interact with the universe in ways that were previously impossible." Harris took a deep breath, absorbing the magnitude of what Zira had just shared. This wasn't just advanced technology. It was a fundamental shift in the way a species viewed itself. The Kailara didn't just use technology to improve their lives, they had become the technology. They had merged with it in a way that allowed them to achieve things beyond the capabilities of any human. "So, this is how you're able to repair the ship without traditional tools?" Harris asked, still trying to wrap his mind around the idea. "Yes," Zira said. "My species is capable of using our bodies to manipulate materials, to repair and enhance structures. We can do things that your tools cannot, and we can do them faster and more efficiently. This is why I didn't need to wear protective suits or use specialized equipment when I was repairing the hull. My biology is my tool." Harris felt a mix of awe and envy. The Kailara's abilities were beyond anything humanity had ever dreamed of. But he also felt a sense of admiration. Zira had given him a glimpse into her world, and it was a world that was both alien and yet strangely familiar. The Kailara were not just a different species. They were an example of what humanity could one day become if they learned to live in harmony with the universe, rather than trying to dominate it. As the conversation continued, Zira spoke of the Kailara's history, their philosophy, and their deep connection to the stars. Harris listened intently, fascinated by the way they viewed the universe. For the Kailara, the stars weren't just distant points of light. They were a reminder of the vastness of existence and the potential for all life to evolve and adapt. When the conversation finally came to an end, Harris felt a sense of gratitude. He had learned more in that short time than he could have ever imagined. Zira had given him a glimpse into a world that was both beautiful and terrifying, a world where biology and technology were not separate entities, but were part of a greater whole. "I can't thank you enough, Zira," Harris said, his voice sincere. "You've opened my eyes to something I never thought possible." Zira smiled, her expression warm. "It is my pleasure, Commander Harris. I only wish to help you understand my people and to help you see the universe in a new way. There is much to learn and much to discover." As Harris left her quarters, he felt a sense of purpose that he hadn't felt before. The journey ahead was no longer just about exploring new planets. It was about understanding the deeper connections between all life forms, human and alien alike. And he knew that with Zira's help, humanity might just begin to understand its place in the vast expanse of the stars. The days aboard the Odyssey felt long as the ship continued its voyage deeper into space. For Commander Harris, the journey was becoming more than just a mission. It was a lesson in understanding. With every passing day, the crew's view of Zira, the Kylara representative, shifted. What had begun as awkward curiosity and confusion was now evolving into something else, a deeper understanding of the vastness of existence and the potential for cooperation between species. But even as the crew grew more accustomed to Zira's presence, some unspoken tension remained. Harris had made peace with the idea of sharing the ship with an alien. He'd even begun to understand the unique abilities Zira possessed, but he was still struggling with how to balance their differences, especially when it came to the way the Kylara viewed things like modesty, privacy, and personal boundaries. The cultural divide between the humans and the Kylara was vast, and it wasn't always easy to reconcile their ways of thinking. It was Lieutenant Jenna, who had spent the most time talking with Zira, who first noticed the subtle changes taking place among the crew. The once nervous glances and awkward silences were becoming less frequent. Instead, there were moments of quiet curiosity as crew members began asking Zira questions about her people, their culture, and their philosophy. But there were also moments of discomfort, especially when Zira would do something that seemed completely normal to her but left the humans unsure of how to respond. One morning, Zira walked into the mess hall as she often did, but this time something was different. She was holding a tray of food, but there was no sign of her usual protective suit. Her bare skin glistened under the fluorescent lights, and for a moment, the entire room went quiet. Some of the crew members stared, unsure of what to do. It wasn't the first time they had seen Zira without her suit, but this was the first time they had seen her walk into a communal space without any clothes on at all. Zira didn't seem to notice the sudden silence. She simply walked up to the counter and began preparing her meal as though nothing was unusual. To her, this was perfectly normal. In her culture, modesty wasn't tied to clothing. It was tied to respect and understanding. She wasn't seeking attention. She was simply being herself. Commander Harris, who had been sitting at one of the tables, looked up at Zira. He felt the familiar discomfort rise in his chest, but he forced himself to ignore it. He had learned so much from Zira, and he knew that his reaction was more about his own upbringing than it was about her actions. Still, it wasn't easy. "Zira," Harris said, his voice calm but firm. "We need to talk about this. I know that. Your culture is different, but this is a shared space. We all need to be comfortable." Zira looked at him, her expression calm and unbothered. "I am comfortable, Commander. I do not see why my presence would make anyone uncomfortable. I am not here to disrupt your way of life, only to share mine." Harris took a deep breath, realizing that Zira didn't see things the way he did. She had no ill intent, no desire to shock anyone. This was simply her way of existing in the world. And yet, he couldn't ignore the fact that some of the crew members were uncomfortable, even if they didn't express it openly. "I understand," Harris said, trying to sound reasonable. "But you need to understand that we have different customs. Here, clothing is seen as a way to maintain personal boundaries, to create a sense of respect. Zira nodded, her eyes thoughtful. I understand your perspective. It is something I have encountered before. But you must also understand that for us, the body is not something to hide. It is a part of us, just as much as our minds or our souls. We do not see it as something shameful. Harris felt conflicted. He respected Zira's views, but he also knew that the crew needed to feel at ease. They were in a foreign environment, far from home, and the last thing he wanted was for tension to grow because of something that could be easily addressed. I think we need to find a balance, Harris said after a moment. Perhaps you could wear a cover of some kind in communal spaces, something that respects the crew's norms while still allowing you to be comfortable. Zira paused, considering his words carefully. I do not wish to cause discomfort, she said slowly. But I also do not wish to hide who I am. I would be willing to wear something if it helps, but I ask that you understand it is not necessary for me. It is for your peace of mind, not mine. Harris nodded, appreciating her willingness to compromise. He could see that this wasn't about disrespect, it was about cultural differences, and sometimes those differences would require difficult conversations and compromises. But that was the nature of exploring the unknown. It wasn't just about discovering new worlds. It was about learning how to coexist with those who were different from you. The conversation ended there, but Harris couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much larger discussion. The Kylara were an advanced species, with a way of thinking that was light years ahead of humanity in some ways. But that didn't mean their culture was better. It was simply different. And the humans aboard the Odyssey would have to learn to adapt, just as the Kylara had adapted to human ways. As the days went on, the crew members began to adjust to Zira's presence. Some still struggled with her lack of clothing, but many found themselves becoming more accepting. It wasn't an easy process, but it was a necessary one. As the ship traveled deeper into space, the crew began to realize that the journey wasn't just about mapping new stars or discovering new planets. It was about learning to coexist with other cultures, to break down the barriers between species, and see the world through different eyes. One day, Lieutenant Jenna approached Harris on the bridge. "Commander, I think we're starting to get it," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of excitement and curiosity. "I've been talking to some of the others, and I think we're beginning to see things differently. We're starting to understand the Kylara's perspective." Harris looked at her, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean, it's not just about the body," Jenna said. "It's about how they view the world. They don't see themselves as separate from nature or from the universe. They're not trying to dominate their environment. They're in tune with it. We've been so focused on conquering space, on taking control of everything around us. But the Kylara, they work with it. They're part of it. And I think that's something we need to learn." Harris thought about this for a moment. He had always believed that humanity's strength lay in its ability to adapt and conquer. But maybe, just maybe, the true strength lay in learning to live in harmony with the universe. "I think you're right," Harris said finally. "This mission, it's not just about finding new worlds. It's about understanding new ways of thinking. We've got a lot to learn, but I think we're on the right path." Jenna smiled. "It's going to take time, but I think we're getting there." Harris nodded, looking out at the stars. The universe was vast and full of unknowns, and they were only just beginning to scratch the surface. But one thing was certain. They were no longer just explorers of space. They were explorers of cultures, of ideas, and of new ways of thinking. And that, perhaps, was the greatest discovery of all. The days aboard the Odyssey had begun to pass in a steady rhythm. Commander Harris and the crew had become accustomed to life with Zira, the Kylara, their new alien crewmate. The initial discomfort had faded into a kind of unspoken understanding. Zira, in her calm, unbothered way, continued to work and live by the same principles that had guided her people for centuries. Her unique approach to space travel, maintenance, and even daily life had forced the human crew to rethink many of their beliefs about themselves and their place in the universe. Despite the progress, Harris knew there was still much to learn. There was always the unspoken tension, the gap between the human worldview and Zira's alien perspective. But as time passed, the crew was beginning to understand that this mission was about more than just exploring new planets. It was about exploring the unknowns within themselves. One day, while the ship was navigating through a newly charted sector of space, disaster struck. A sudden, violent electromagnetic storm sent the Odyssey into chaos. The ship shook violently as alarms blared throughout the halls. The crew scrambled to their stations, trying to stabilize the ship before it was too late. But the damage was severe. Critical systems were failing, and the power core was on the verge of overload. "Everyone, report to your stations!" Harris shouted, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We need to stabilize the core now. Lieutenant Jenna, get to the power systems. We'll need all hands on deck." Jenna rushed past him, her face determined. Harris turned to the other crew members, who were already moving to assist in different parts of the ship. The energy in the air was thick with tension, and everyone knew how much was at stake. The Odyssey had always faced obstacles, but this storm was something unlike any they had ever encountered. Harris knew they were facing a challenge far beyond their expectations. But then his mind turned to Zira. Her people had encountered dangers in space that humans could hardly imagine. Maybe her knowledge could help. Without thinking twice, Harris hurried to find her. Zira was already in the engineering bay, moving with remarkable speed and precision. Her calmness in the face of disaster was a sharp contrast to the frantic pace of the human crew. Zira was unbothered, her focused expression unshaken by the chaos around her. "Zira," Harris said, trying to match her calmness, "we need your help. The storm is damaging our systems. We need to stabilize the core before we lose everything." Zira turned to face him, her eyes clear and steady. "I can help, Commander, but we must act quickly. The ship's systems are not designed to withstand such a strong storm. I will need to connect with the core itself to stabilize the energy." Harris nodded. He had heard of the Kailara's unique ability to interact with technology on a biological level. Zira's species could use their biology to interface with machines in ways humans could never do. But he had never seen it in action. Not like this. "You can interface with the core directly?" Harris asked, his voice low with awe. Zira nodded. "Yes. My people have developed the ability to sync our biology with machines. It is how we have advanced in space travel and exploration. If I can link my body with the core's system, I can stabilize it long enough for the damage to be repaired." Harris was skeptical, but he had no choice. "Do it! We don't have much time." Zira approached the core, her movements precise and graceful. She extended her hands toward the large, glowing energy core, and as she made contact, something incredible happened. Harris watched in awe as Zira's body seemed to glow faintly, her hands melding with the core as though she were becoming one with it. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. The storm had left the ship on the brink of collapse, but Zira was now acting as the bridge between the core's unstable energy and the ship's systems. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, slowly, the ship began to stabilize. The violent shaking stopped. The alarms gradually quieted down and the lights flickered back to their normal brightness. "We're back in control," Harris breathed, disbelief in his voice. "You did it." Zira stepped back from the core, her hands slowly retracting from the energy field. She looked at Harris, her expression calm as ever. "It is done," Zira said. "But the storm is still affecting the ship's systems. The core is stable, but we will need to make repairs immediately if we are to avoid further damage." Harris stood there for a moment, his mind still processing what he had just witnessed. He had known that Zira was capable, but this, This was beyond anything he had imagined. She had quite literally become one with the ship's systems, manipulating energy on a level that no human could. "Thank you," Harris said finally, his voice full of gratitude. "We couldn't have done it without you." Zira smiled, her expression warm. "I am only doing my part, Commander, but your crew has done well. You have adapted quickly, even in the face of danger." As the crew continued to work together to repair the damage caused by the storm, Harris reflected on what had just happened. Zira had saved them. Her people had developed the ability to interact with technology on a level that humans could barely begin to understand. And yet, despite the obvious gap between their species, they had worked together to save the ship. Zira had offered her knowledge and her abilities, and the humans had responded by trusting her. It was a partnership, a new kind of partnership, that was beginning to form. Later that evening, after the repairs had been made and the ship was once again stable, Harris found himself standing on the bridge, staring out at the stars. The storm had been terrifying, but it had also shown him something important. The Kailara weren't just advanced because of their technology. They were advanced because they had learned to adapt to the universe in ways humanity was only beginning to understand. And it wasn't just about technology. It was about how they viewed the world. They saw themselves as part of the universe, not above it. The storm had forced the humans to realize that they could no longer rely solely on their own methods of exploration. They needed to learn from the Kailara, to think beyond their human limitations. The universe was vast and filled with dangers they could not yet comprehend, but there was also so much to learn, so much to gain from interacting with alien species. Harris looked over at Lieutenant Jenna, who was standing nearby. She had been one of the first to recognize the importance of Zira's presence on the ship. Now, as the crew worked in relative calm, she approached him. "Commander," Jenna said softly, "I think we've learned something today. This mission, it's about more than just exploring the stars. It's about learning to live with those who are different from us. It's about adapting to the unknown." Harris nodded, his eyes still fixed on the stars. "You're right. This storm, it was a wake-up call. We can't go forward thinking that humanity has all the answers. We need to be open to new ideas, new ways of thinking, and we need to learn how to work with those who have something to teach us." Jenna smiled. "I think we're on the right path." Harris looked back at her, his expression thoughtful. "We've only just begun." As the ship sailed on through the stars, Harris felt a deep sense of gratitude. The journey ahead would be filled with challenges, but now he knew that they weren't facing those challenges alone. They had allies, creatures from distant stars with knowledge and wisdom that could help humanity grow and adapt. Together, they would face the unknown, and in doing so, they would redefine what it meant to explore space and perhaps what it meant to be human.